Alright, time to film the video for Friday. So let's talk about why some deontology is advisable for consequentialist thought. So essentially when someone says deontology, what they're trying to say is that there are firm moral principles that one should believe in. For example, don't lie, don't steal. Those things that basically go without saying. They don't care about consequences. They just are right and wrong. So it is purely, how should I put this? Prescriptive rather than descriptive. Instead of saying, what are we looking for, they say, alright, what should be done? They look purely at principles. And what that benefits consequentialists with is that such firm moral principles make trust easier for people. It's a lot easier to agree with someone and work with someone when you believe they have firm moral principles and aren't just going to throw you under the bus the moment they think that they can get a bit more out of you by doing so than not. It also allows for a firm justification for why certain actions must be punished for those who do not see the greater whole. For example, justice is important in consequentialist thought. Now one may disagree and say, oh no, justice isn't, and that it can't be associated, but the thing is, a sense of justice, of right and wrong, is necessary for good consequences. Because if people believe they can do something without punishment for said actions, then naturally they will do more of it. Essentially, leaving a crime unpunished, an action which hurts others unpunished, is itself a crime against those people, those who suffered. So justice is a firm requirement for proper behavior reinforcement and action. And you need deontology oftentimes to make that make sense for a lot of people, because when they think of consequentialism, for obvious reasons, they think, oh, just do the greatest good for the greatest many. However you go about that doesn't matter. But it does matter in the sense that to pursue the greatest good, you often have to emphasize that and encourage people to behave in certain ways. And thus, you need that idea of just right and wrong. Because a lot of people are really bad at figuring out the greater good on their own. And frankly, I wouldn't trust most people with figuring out the greater good on their own. There's a list of people who thought they're acting in the greater good only to end up basically causing more damage than they were worth. And then another thing to note, when people believe in concrete principles, they are more likely to follow them and thus boost overall outcomes. For example, if I want $5, under consequentialist thought, what matters is the greatest good for the greatest many. So how I get that $5 doesn't really matter so long as the consequences are better than if I don't get the $5. Meaning, if I steal $5 from someone, but they don't notice, that is fine. Problem is, there are ramifications for that. And when you only think in terms of short-term consequences, well then you don't tend to take into account things like destroying trust, weakening society, and overall just making things more hectic. And that is a problem. And thus, if you instead have someone believe in concrete principles like stealing is wrong, then it's a lot easier to convince people to follow those principles. And thus, when following said principles, boost overall outcomes, because people are less worried about theft and murder and lying than they would otherwise, because they believe firmly that others are following good principles and aren't likely to just do something because greater good and whatever, which oftentimes is just an excuse, really. And of course, things like consent and other ideas which rely on deontology need less explanation than they would if one is relying purely on consequentialism. Consent is a good thing, I'd argue, even in consequentialist belief. Why? Well, because in order to get the best consequences, you need people to work together willingly. There are two ways to get people to do something together. 1, incentives, make them want to work together, or 2, force them to work together. Those are the two options. They either have to have a reason, internal or external, to do something, or they must be forced to do something. And naturally, when it comes to getting the best results, it's a lot easier to get those results when people agree willingly, because they're less likely to resist, there's less energy spent suppressing them, and there's less time wasted convincing them, because, they agree already. And so consent is, I'd argue, very important for even consequentialism. But the base idea of consent often requires a root in deontology, the idea that consent is a good thing. it is good to ask people before you work with them or make them do something. And so, it's a lot easier to explain consent through deontology of just, well, it's good to get people to agree before doing something, than it would be for the consequentialist explanation of, hey, in order to ensure the best results, we need people to agree willingly to these things so as to maximize outcomes, so we should do that. It's a lot easier to just say, consent good, and keep it at that. It makes things more efficient, and thus allows society to function overall. And then, of course, there's the important thing. With consequentialism, what matters is consequences, outcomes. And fundamentally, you often see deontology get better results and outcomes than consequentialist thought, or pure consequentialist thought. And why is that? Well, because people are more trusting and all of these other things. It's a lot easier to get them on the same page. It's a lot easier to make them work together. It's a lot easier to make everyone cooperate willingly. And thus, you get better outcomes. If everyone is not lying, if everyone is not murdering, if everyone is doing the right thing, then consequences are good. The results are good. And so convincing as many people as possible that these moral principles should be abided by, should be held to, is a good thing. Now, of course, some level of just ruthless efficiency will be a must in a society like ours. You cannot get around the fact of scarcity or the reality of logistics. We need to coordinate things, we need to get scarce resources where they are needed, and we need to take actions that sometimes hurt others to do so. It's not a nice thing, but it's a reality. And so there must be some level of willingness to essentially get blood on your hands, to do things that aren't pleasant but are still necessary. But, of course, as stated, there must be still a moral position, a firm one on what is right and wrong. Just pure principled stances. Because that is how you get people to agree easier and more efficiently. Sometimes someone must be willing to grab the whip and hit someone, or grab the sword and slash. But the best, oftentimes, is when the whip isn't needed, or the sword not drawn. And instead, agreement and contract can solve things. And that's the thing. We want good consequences. We want good outcomes. Sometimes you need moral principles from other ideas to get there. Deontology and consequentialism are oftentimes the two main forms of thought when it comes to ethics. Natural law is there too, but when it comes to the big ones, deontological thought and consequentialist thought are the main ones. And of course, people disagree about which is better. But sometimes, why not take from one to contribute to the other? Or work together to get good outcomes. Essentially, some level of firm moral principles benefits consequentialist thought and the view of consequences matter. And sometimes the view on consequences matters to those who rely on firm moral principles and deontological models. After all, if someone's knocking at your door with an axe and asks where your friend is, and you're told not to lie, but if you do choose to lie, you save his life, well then, that's on you. If you don't lie, and he dies, that's also on you. When it is your choice, the actions are on you, and so you'll be held responsible when one of your principles fails. And so some level of care for consequences is important. You must be able to learn from everything, and learn what is wrong with everything. Sometimes there are just problems with an idea. Again, axe murderer. That is just how things are. And so, that is my belief. And also, since it is Friday, I will announce something. Next week, around Saturday or Sunday, we'll see when, I am going on a trip. I'm going to meet up with my dad and my brother, and we're going to have a good time. We'll probably film some videos there too, on where we're going. So, as a heads up, you may see some videos somewhere else, or with my face. Now, you've likely already seen my face at least a bit, but still, you'll probably see more of it. And you may see my brother's face as well. Please check out his channel if you're interested. I'm sure you can find out what it is. Also, have a good one. Goodbye.